I want to talk about the Liberty Pledge.
Today, I'm joined by two of Colorado's political party leaders to discuss a historic agreement designed to help restore liberty to our great state. Dave Williams is the chairman of the Republican Party of Colorado, and Hannah Goodman is the chairwoman of the Libertarian Party of Colorado. Just recently, they announced an agreement between the two of them and their leadership teams that they will work together to not compete with each other in races where there are pro liberty candidates. What exactly are you agreeing to?
The agreement is quite simple. If there are candidates who are pro-liberty, who are going to fight for limited government and maximize our freedoms in Colorado in partisan races, then the Libertarians will not run competing candidates in those competitive races and potentially spoil the election of a good candidate.
Now, why did this pledge come about? Well, you're looking at one of the reasons for this pledge, and that was because of what happened in the Dan Ward congressional campaign in 2022. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, here's a brief summary. In 2022, Dan Ward ran for Congress in Colorado Congressional District 8. And he got over 9,000 votes. The Colorado GOP candidate, Barbara Kirkmeyer, lost that election. And a lot of people believe that Dan Ward spoiled that election.
Everyone kind of understands that the spoiler effect does happen from time to time. It doesn't always happen. And there's a lot of establishment Republicans that would like to blame third parties all the time. But it is still something that happens from time to time. And I think if you look at 2022's election for Congressional District 8 specifically, where we had Barb Kirkmeyer lose to now Congresswoman Caraveo, and then you also look at the State Board of Education race where Peggy Probst, our nominee, lost to the Democrat because of the American Constitution Party candidate. I think it's clear that there are times where this is a problem and this does happen.
That was never true. He never spoiled that election. In fact, I actually wrote an editorial that said he wasn't a spoiler. Libertarian Party message clicked in Colorado. Feedback. By Colorado Politics, December 13th, 2022, updated 3 years ago. As the PR director for Richard Dan Ward, Libertarian for Colorado CD 8, and Ross Klopf, Libertarian for Colorado CD7, I can say with full confidence that our target demographic was never the Republican or the Democrat voter. To the contrary, our demographic from beginning to end was the unaffiliated voter. When we were contacted by someone who was affiliated with the Democrats or the Republicans, we urged them to work out their differences with their party. We explained that we did not want them voting for our candidates because they felt our candidates were the lesser of the two evils. Our candidates wanted their votes because they felt our candidates gave them a voice. If this was not the case, please do not vote for our candidate. Withholding their vote gave them the strongest voice. We believe the reason Richard Dan Ward made such an impact is because he had a strong ground game. He met one-on-one with hundreds of voters and actually listened to them. He knew how they felt about issues, and they knew what he would bring to Congress. I don't want to ignore the need to blame someone for losing, but Dan's winning proves there are ignored voices out there. By saying Dan's 4% was a protest vote, you're doing what everyone keeps doing to these disenfranchised voters. You keep saying they don't matter. We said during the entire election, there is an entire block of voters who do not want to be Democrats and do not want to be Republicans, and the media continue to ignore them. The Klopf for Congress and Ward for Congress campaign did not ignore these voters. Dan benefited from the message and Ross did not. That's politics. Some people click with the voters and some do not. But our message clicked with everyone. This we know because the voters told us. Patty McMahon, Littleton. I let people know he was never a spoiler in that race. I know that because I did a lot of research after that race to find out why he won. This is because after those numbers posted, we were all baffled by them. We didn't understand why he got so many votes. We ran him as an alternative candidate, and we had a very strong ground game. We campaigned hoping those voters would show up, but we never thought they would. So we were really surprised when they did. And I tried to explain to people after the election that the voters that showed up for Dan were not people that were ever going to vote for Republicans, and they were never going to vote for Democrats. These were unique voters in their own right. But the GOP just refused to accept that explanation. And actually, so did the Libertarian Party. No matter how many times we tried to explain to them that Dan Ward was a unique candidate and the people liked him and voted for him, they just refused to accept that. They kept trying to tell us that it was because he was a spoiler. And I kept saying, okay, if he's a spoiler, give me your evidence that shows he's a spoiler, because all of my evidence shows that he was not a spoiler. They voted for him because they liked him. And by the way, that challenge still stands. If anybody can show me evidence that Dan Ward was a spoiler, I want to see it, because that evidence doesn't exist. Trust me, that research doesn't exist. They used Dan Ward's win as a way to scam the GOP into this Liberty Pledge to make it look like the Libertarian Party had more power than it did, and they didn't. And that was wrong.
We recorded this episode last Wednesday evening, and today is Friday afternoon. And in that time period, we've learned a few things that we kind of need to address, because frankly, I'm kind of at a loss for words for some of the things I've learned and heard. In the episode, the first thing that's easy correction, I think, was an unintentional mistake. In the episode, they state that the Republican Party reached out to the Libertarian Party about this agreement. It's actually the other way around. Hannah Goodman, chair of the Libertarian Party of Colorado, stated that she was actually the one that reached out to the GOP. Fine, an honest mistake, I'm sure. However, there's a second part to this that's really more about the context, and I felt like it was important to actually bring this up at the beginning of this episode and give people context as to what this episode includes. We talk a lot about Dan Ward, the campaign for Dan Ward, who is the congressional candidate in Congressional District 8 in Colorado. He covered the margin of the Republican and Democratic voters he had 4%, and a lot of the media claimed he swung the ballot from the Republican to the Democrat and gave the Democrat the seat. In this episode, he's described as a line item or a line holder candidate. After reading some of the messages from some of his volunteers, which, again, line item candidates don't have volunteers, but he had a PR director. He was attending campaign events with other candidates. He was doing podcast interviews as the congressional candidate for the Libertarian Party. That's not a line holder candidate. So I'm kind of struggling here as to why board members of the Libertarian Party of Colorado would describe him as a line holder candidate. That doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing is, not only it's one thing to come onto our podcast and we're going to have Libertarian Party members. It's one thing to describe a candidate on our show as a line holder candidate. It's a reality in the LP that there are line holder candidates. But not only have they described him as a line holder candidate on our show incorrectly, they described him to the media as a line holder candidate. The comms director the Denver Post reached out to the comms director to try to reach Dan's campaign and get a statement. And the comms director of the Libertarian Party of Colorado said he's just a line holder candidate. And that's how he's quoted in the newspaper. So anyone who reads that article is going to think, well, I guess all Libertarian candidates are just line holder candidates. The other thing is, the board of Colorado knew he had a PR director. They knew because on November 14th, right after the election, on November 14th, that PR director was in front of their board saying, I'm the PR director for Dan Ward.
My name is Patty McMahon. I'm the Public Affairs Director for Ross Clough and Daniel Ward's congressional campaigns.
And to say a month later, when the Libertarian Party of Colorado was reached out to by the Denver Post, to then tell the Denver Post he's just a paper candidate, instead of sending the Denver Post to that PR director, I'm frankly at a complete loss for words. I hope that this is mere incompetence and not maliciousness. We're going to get to the bottom of a lot of this. The plan now is we're going to send an email to the board of the Libertarian Party of Colorado detailing all of these things that we want to talk to them about, because there's a laundry list of them. And we're going to see if they'll come back on and talk to us about it. Because frankly, we need to get to the bottom of this. Members of the Libertarian Party of Colorado need to know what's going on in their own party. And frankly, right now they don't. Especially surrounding this deal around the GOP. The fact that they might be sabotaging Libertarian Party candidates completely colors and makes completely clear what the objective of the agreement with the GOP is. So we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to figure out if they are, in fact, trying to sabotage Libertarian Party candidates. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Hopefully it'll be soon. We're going to leave this episode up because it does, in fact, deal with the agreement. It shows why it's a bad idea for pretty much every party in the every Libertarian state affiliate. Because it's not going to work out for Liberty in the long run, because I don't think that there is any path to liberty through the duopoly.
The reason I'm coming forward is not to give the GOP anything, but to give the Libertarian Party back its voice of principle. Because there's nothing worse than scamming people. You don't need to scam people to win elections. And by the way, nobody is winning elections with the Liberty Pledge. Not the GOP, and certainly not the Libertarians, because the Libertarians are literally taking their voice out of elections because of that Libertarian Pledge.
September 18th, 2023, 12:51 p.m. UTC. Libertarian Avenger launches campaign against Boebert. Over the last couple of months, we have probably spent more time in this space discussing the Colorado Libertarian Party, LPCO, than we have over the course of the entire previous decade. Third parties in Colorado rarely take on much relevance because of their fairly small memberships and overall lack of organization. In fact, most of our discussions about third parties in Colorado are because of some relation to the Colorado Republican Party. Photo on the right of former GOP chair Dave Williams. Caption reads, State Republican Party. Chairman Dave Williams contemplating some other terrible idea. We're discussing a third party again today because of the bizarre alliance that State Republican Party Chairman Dave Williams made with the LPCO earlier in the summer. The stated goal of this alliance was to prevent a Libertarian candidate from running in battleground districts because of the concern that a 2022 Libertarian challenger might have siphoned enough votes away from the Republican to ensure a CO08 victory for Democrat Yadira Caraveo. The LPCO agreed to withhold support for a Libertarian candidate in 2024 should Republicans sign a wacky pledge, promising to endorse a bunch of bizarre Libertarian positions. To the great joy of the LPCO, Williams began sending the Libertarian pledge, from a Colorado GOP email address, to all announced Republican candidates. As far as we can tell, no Republican candidate has agreed to sign the LPCO pledge, including the GOP candidates running in the two biggest races of 2024, CO-03 and CO-08. The pledge made even less sense in CO-03, given that there was already a Libertarian candidate in the race, Mark Elworth, Jr. Nevertheless, incumbent Representative Lauren Boebert's rifle refusal to sign the pledge has drawn the ire of the LPCO and added a second Libertarian candidate to the field of candidates. Left side of screen, Libertarian Party of Colorado, Board of Directors, Twitter. A Libertarian challenger, James Wiley, at Red Devil 89, has emerged and will seek the party's nomination for Congressional District 3 following at Lauren Boebert's failure to sign the Libertarian Party of Colorado's, LPCO, Liberty Candidate Pledge. Right side of page, cartoon drawing of a human. Caption, artist rendering of James Wiley, the new Libertarian challenger in CO03. Story continues. That tweet/X, above detailing the decision to run another Libertarian candidate against Boebert, whose name is also regularly misspelled by the LPCO, the Pledge, which simply commits the CO-GOP candidates to abide by the U.S. Constitution and the principles of limited government, was a bridge too far for the Congresswoman. Considering Congresswoman Boebert won re-election by a razor-thin margin, a Libertarian challenger surely ends Boebert's hopes for re-election. And who is this brave challenger? Some dude named James Wiley, whose website is called, we couldn't have possibly made this up, wileyforvengeance.com. We don't know much about Wiley, including what he looks like, because there is very little information about him online. There isn't a photo or a bio on his website, but the LPCO does link to this amazeballs letter from Wiley. The Libertarian Party of Colorado entered a pact with the Colorado Republicans to not challenge their candidates so long as they would pledge to abide by libertarian principles. Since then, Lauren Boebert, aka Beetlejuice, has publicly denounced our pledge and defamed the principles we cherish as unworthy. This insult to who I am as a libertarian compels me to eagerly fulfill the duties invoked by the Libertarian Pact and challenge her in her district, which she so nearly lost by only 542 votes. 542 votes are not enough to stop me from being the cause of her defeat. Polls emphasis. In truth, I will be elected by the voters of CD3 as their Libertarian representative to Congress because the land of our district is filled with sovereign American people whose rights have suffered immeasurable damage by state actors. CD3 needs activist leaders prepared and willing to demolish the federal government. These damages began to accumulate 247 years ago in the year 1776 and have now reached an abhorrent scale of violation, too grand for a free people to submissively bear. An entire generation of elected officials will be replaced by radical American idealists, prepared to reset and restore our federal governance to its most primitive and most powerless state of origin. Polls note, Boebert won re-election in 2022 by 546 votes, but fact-checking is for people who hate liberty. In short, Wiley is running for Congress because Boebert wouldn't sign the LPCO pledge and because he wants to completely dismantle the federal government. We're not sure that a libertarian candidate would actually make the difference between victory and defeat for Boebert in 2024, but we're very comfortable in predicting that James Wiley has no chance whatsoever at winning this race. Regardless, that alliance concocted by GOP Chair Dave Williams seems to be backfiring. The pledge has succeeded mainly in handing the LPCO a specific reason to challenge a Republican incumbent such as Boebert, and it has made Libertarian candidate announcements more newsworthy than they have ever been in Colorado. This wouldn't be the first time that a Republican Party dalliance with a third party went awry. In 2010, the American Constitution Party, ACP, became a big topic when former Republican Tom Tancredo ran for governor under the ACP banner. Colorado Republicans pushed Tancredo to run as the ACP candidate because they were worried that little-known Dan Mays, the actual Republican Party nominee for governor, would have no chance against Democrat John Hickenlooper. Then Republican Party Chairman Dick Wadhams even announced that Mays would not be supported by the Colorado GOP. Hickenlooper won that election easily, but playing footsie with the ACP nearly cost the Colorado Republican Party its major party status when Mays came dangerously close to dropping below 10% of the statewide vote. Mays finished with 11%.
When somebody comes to you with snake oil, like the last LPCO board did to the GOP, question that. Because the first thing the GOP should have recognized was that the people that were responsible for the alleged spoiler were no longer in the LP. They should have come to me and Dan and asked if we did any research on that. I would have said, yeah, you bet I did. I did a lot of research on it. I think that there are 4 people that the LPCO say are a success of the Libertarian Pledge, and I disagree. They are Rebecca Kelty, Dan Woog, Gabe Evans, and Ryan Gonzalez. So I'm going to start with Rebecca Kelty. She's the only one that I can get my head around that could actually be a success of the Liberty Pledge, and here's why. She won by 3 votes. Running and winning against an incumbent is no small deal. But here's something I'm going to say a lot during my campaign, and I apologize to people who are going to get sick of hearing it. But I began my career as a federal investigator, which means 1, I was trained in investigative techniques, and 2, I have an investigative mind. So when I see something that doesn't make sense, I tend to investigate it. Here's what we know about Rebecca Kelty. She was Republican. She was running against an incumbent Democrat. She signed the Libertarian Pledge, and she won by 3 votes. Now, the Liberty Pledge and the 3 votes would be connected if you can show that Libertarians had moved into El Paso County during that period of time, but that's not true. What actually happened is that the Libertarians lost voters. In fact, they lost 57 voters. What was also significant was that El Paso was experiencing a steady rise of Republican voters. Looking at this, it explains why voters may have been leaning towards Rebecca. It still doesn't explain why she would unseat a Democrat. What we know about unaffiliated voters in Colorado is that they tend to stand on the center and lean a little left. El Paso County was gaining Republican voters. It doesn't look like they were gaining enough Republican voters to shift an election. And it certainly wasn't Libertarians because they were losing voters. When I look at the final vote tally, we have 20,641 voters for Rebecca, and we have 20,638 for Stephanie Vigil. That's a really slim margin. That tells me there was a lot of conflicted voters in this area. Why? So I did some digging. And what I found was there was conflict going on. And the conflict was actually being caused by Stephanie. What happened is that she had made herself quite a target. In one media report, it said that Stephanie Vigil described some Republican House members as bad men, violent men who wanted to kill a lot of us, particularly pointing to GOP representatives from El Paso County. Vigil said she cannot work with somebody who is my sworn enemy. They do not want me to carry on living. This is a very significant thing, especially when you look at the makeup of El Paso County. Here's what I think happened. The type of rhetoric that Stephanie was spewing would keep the center voters away from the ballot box, but it would bring people that were in favor of Rebecca to the ballot box. Gabe Evans, CD8, this is the reason for the Liberty Pledge, right? So let's talk about it. He won by 2,449 votes. And when he won, everybody in the Libertarian Party was doing cartwheels. And they were saying, CC, you signed the Liberty Pledge and you got CD8 back. And it looked like they were right. But I'm here to challenge that because they weren't right. Let's go back to 2022 when Richard Dan Ward ran. When he ran, there were 3 candidates and a write-in. The 3 candidates, a Republican, a Democrat, and Dan. Dan was the Libertarian, and he was the alleged spoiler. He got 9,280 votes. It was a write-in, and he got 99 votes. And that was a total of 9,379 votes. And everybody said that was the spoiler. That's why Barbara Kirkmeyer didn't win. And I've always disagreed with that. And I've said, no, that's not true. I could never find any evidence to show those voters would have voted for Barbara Kirkmeyer. So let's go to the 2024 election, and you have 4 candidates. The Republican, the Democrat, approval voting, unity, and then you have a write-in. Their total votes are 9,425 votes, 46 more voters than the combination between Dan Ward and Tim Long. With the Republican and the Democrat, it's almost an equal split from what they got in 2024. The only difference is this vote margin went to Republican in 2024 instead of to the Democrat. Those voters are what you call your persuadable universe. The Liberty Pledge doesn't matter to those people. As a matter of fact, I think the Liberty Pledge hurt Gabe Evans. CD8 is comprised of 3 counties, Adams, Larimer, and Weld. In all 3 counties, the unaffiliated voter held between 49 to 50% of the voter bloc in 2024. In Adams County, Libertarians lost 57 voters in that election cycle. In Larimer County, Libertarians lost 1 voter in that election cycle, and in Weld County, Libertarians lost 23 voters. In that election cycle, Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliates all gained voters. Libertarians losing voters was quite a feat. The only way the Libertarian Pledge would have value would be if Libertarians were gaining in value. But you can't make that correlation at all because there aren't any Libertarians in that area that are growing that area. They're actually leaving that area. My theory is that Gabe Evans might have won by more if he wouldn't have signed the Liberty Pledge. And here's why. I go back to the unaffiliated voter. The unaffiliated voter was a huge block in all 3 of his counties. And unaffiliated voters, again, sit on the center, lean a little to the left in the state of Colorado. The Libertarian Party during that time was engaging in messaging that was offensive and polarizing. And this was not the type of messaging that a center, slightly left-leaning voter would be drawn to. And if they came across the Liberty Pledge and they saw that he had signed it, or maybe formed a partnership with the Libertarians, I think that would have done more to dissuade them from voting for him than persuade. Next up, we have Ryan Gonzalez, and they like to use Ryan Gonzalez as another success story. And again, I think Ryan Gonzalez was a great candidate. Ryan Gonzalez got 13,233 votes. Mary Young, the incumbent, got 12,670, which means that Ryan won by 563 votes. Here's what you need to know about House District 50, which is Ryan Gonzalez's district. It sits firmly in Weld County. And Weld County is a very Republican district. In fact, during the election cycle, Republicans added 3,864 voters. Democrats only added 1,250 voters. So that's a pretty strong Republican district, which means Ryan was walking into friendly territory. and it added 7,256 new unaffiliated voters, which is double the amount of Republicans that it added. Weld County is also not a Libertarian-friendly county because during that election cycle, it lost 23 Libertarians. So we have to ask, how much of an impact did the Liberty Pledge have on Ryan Gonzalez's win? And I'm going to say I don't think it had any impact on Ryan Gonzalez's win. One, I think Ryan Gonzalez was a very good candidate. I think he was running in a very Republican-friendly district. I think he had a very good message. But Ryan also campaigned a lot with Gabe Evans. And Gabe Evans and Ryan Gonzalez were a very good team. So trying to use the Liberty Pledge as the reason for their win, I think minimizes how good they really were as campaigners. Because again, I go back to, I think the Liberty Pledge hurt Ryan Gonzalez. I think he probably could have gotten more votes if he wouldn't have been attached to the Liberty Pledge. Again, I go back to there were 7,256 new unaffiliated voters in Weld County. And those voters traditionally stand on the center, move a little to the left, and if any of them did any research into the Libertarian Party after learning that Ryan Gonzalez had signed the Liberty Pledge, I don't believe they would have thought that was a good thing. And so I just need to emphasize that if you're going to sign something like the Liberty Pledge, you have to make sure that the people you're signing it with are not edgelording and calling people retards and faggots and things like that in their public posts, because these are the kind of things that derail campaigns, not enhance them. And when you have somebody like Ryan Gonzalez and Gabe Evans that are trying to flip seats, this is not a good strategy for flipping seats. So I go back to, I think they won in spite of the Liberty Pledge, not because of it. Which brings me to the final one, which is Dan Woog, who won by 110 votes. Now, I'm not even going to make any bones about this. I think Dan winning by 110 votes is a travesty. He should have swept this because there's no reason why he should have only won by 110 votes. District 19 straddles two counties, Weld and Boulder. Now, we already know that in Weld County, it was a strong Republican county. It lost Libertarian, added Republican voters, it had 7,256 new unaffiliated voters. And Dan was the type that would appeal to the unaffiliated voters. And now you go to Boulder County. If you look at what was happening in Boulder in 2024, it was really interesting because one, it actually did add Libertarians. It added 19 Libertarian voters. They're not adding Republicans. They added 3,398 Democrats. Affiliated, they added 6,868 new voters. And they liked Dan, but they didn't love Dan. What was it about Dan that they didn't like? And I go back to, it was the Liberty Pledge. I think that the Boulder County voter is very sophisticated, and I think they do their research. And I think that when they researched him and they saw that he signed the Liberty Pledge, and then they researched the Libertarians, and again, I go back to, they saw the type of messaging they were doing, they saw what they were saying, they said no. In Dan's case, I think the Liberty Pledge hurt him. I think if he just breaks away from that and becomes his own person, I think he's going to sweep the next election. Removing the Liberty Pledge was a very honorable thing by the new board. Because the truth is, it looks like it's been hurting GOP candidates more than it's been hurting Libertarian candidates. The Liberty Pledge is a warning to both Republicans and Libertarians, which is don't fall for snake oil. It's going to tell you that a certain formula works with voters. Ask to see their research, because I have research, and I have tons of research on the Liberty Pledge. It looks like the Liberty Pledge wasn't successful at all, and why it looks like the Liberty Pledge probably hurt GOP voters more than it helped them. And I can also show you why Dan Ward was never a spoiler. And when people claim to know something, ask why they know it. They sold you snake oil, and you bought it. I get it. But now it's time to move forward, and we need to develop real strategies with people who actually have strategies and do research and don't pretend that they know stuff they don't know. So let's move forward. We can have a good election year. And that's what this is about, rebuilding. So let's rebuild, but let's rebuild it right.